2019 Hong Kong protests, an introduction to controlled opposition. This blog post, written by Chang Chun, argues that the 2019 Hong Kong protests are part of a larger communist deception strategy. It will introduce the tactical concept of controlled opposition. It will discuss how the Hong Kong government's attempt to pass an extradition bill with China and Taiwan was in fact used as a provocation by the Chinese Communist Party. We will also look at controlled opposition as a tactic, which was used by the Soviet Union and its successor states, and by China. This document will cover what the international media will not cover regarding the Hong Kong protests. By Chang Chun. The author of the document will show that in its more violent manifestations, the Hong Kong protests are not a spontaneous expression of the city's desire for independence, but fully planned by the Chinese Communist Party and carried out by the Ministry of State Security. Controlled opposition has been used at various times in Chinese history, as early as the Qin dynasty when the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, unified the warring states into what is known as China today. For those who wish to study ancient Chinese history, be warned that most of Chinese history is an unending tale of subversion and controlled opposition to achieve desired outcomes. Controlled opposition means that two parties in a dispute, regardless of animosity, are guided by the same hand. Controlled opposition was used with ruthless efficiency by the Chinese Communist Party in the 1960s in what it is known as the Cultural Revolution. Anatoly Golitsyn, the author of New Lies for Old and the Perestroika Deception, explained the use of controlled opposition in the following way. The creation of a false, controlled opposition movement like the dissident movement in the Soviet Union serves internal and external strategic purposes. Internally, it provides a vehicle for the eventual false liberalization of a communist regime. It provokes some would-be opposition elements to expose themselves to counteraction, and others are driven to conformity or despair. Externally, dissidents can act as vehicles for a variety of disinformation themes on the subject of the evolution of the communist system. Anatoly Golitsyn warned in advance of events that the collapse of the Soviet Union was in fact planned, and was a deception operation to fool the West. Controlled opposition was an essential factor in the Communist Party Soviet Union strategy of false democratization and liberalization. Despite the apparent disappearance of Marxism-Leninism as the ruling ideology of Russia, the Communist Party Soviet Union remains in control. It maintains its networks throughout the former communist countries, some of which are now member states of NATO. In terms of ancient Chinese strategy, this is called entering the enemy's camp. In 1997, when Hong Kong was handed over to the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party wasted no time in bringing Hong Kong in line with mainland patriotic norms. The political factions at that time included the Hong Kong independence movement and the pro-Beijing faction. Both were controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. How could it be otherwise once Beijing achieved sovereignty over Hong Kong? No politician who genuinely opposed Beijing's interests could be protected from agents of the secret police. Citizens of Hong Kong have been routinely kidnapped and disappeared into China's Gulag prison system, a terrifying prospect for any sensible Hong Kong leader, especially for people whose lives are comfortable. Hong Kong is now a controlled opposition nightmare. Despite Hong Kong having been highly ranked in the Freedom Index, it is not free. The Chinese Communist Party has extensive control of the student movement, which includes the student unions, factions of the Hong Kong democracy movement, and the overtly pro-Beijing faction. Hong Kong society is literally run by the Chinese Communist Party, and there is no denying it. The Chinese Communists got to work early. The 2047 deadline, at which time Hong Kong's political system is slated to merge with the People's Republic of China, is all a lie. The Chinese Communist Party has already stated that the Sino-Joint British Declaration signed in 1984 and the Basic Law is no longer respected and has been invalidated. There are warning signs showing that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to make Hong Kong part of mainland China, 27 years ahead of schedule. The provocation operation in Hong Kong started with the Hong Kong government planning to pass an extradition bill which would allow Hong Kong to extradite criminals wanted in China and Taiwan. Communist China does not care about an extradition treaty with Hong Kong when it is already using the Ministry of State Security, Bureau 4, to kidnap people. Initially, the protests against the extradition bill were peaceful. By the end of July, however, the protests turned violent. The daughter of the founder of the Maxim Catering Empire in Hong Kong, Annie Wu, publicly criticized the Hong Kong protesters, which led to an increase of violence carried out by the protesters against businesses and restaurants, including Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, and other American brands. The violence was carefully planned by the Chinese Communist Party. In its turn, the international media has done a disservice by not reporting what is happening in Hong Kong. For those who understand secret police methods, the violence was planned by the Chinese Communist Party and the Ministry of State Security. This violence subtly discredits the independence movement among law-abiding citizens in China. It is also depicted as a CIA operation, as an attempt to subvert and divide China. The Hong Kong democracy movement, which is alternately called the Hong Kong independence movement, has been used to advance a communist provocation. Some people in Hong Kong describe the Hong Kong protest as a leaderless protest, but secretly it is led by agents of the People's Republic. The Hong Kong democracy movement includes the Hong Kong Democratic Party, New Democrats, Civic Party, and Hong Kong First, which have seats in the Legislative Council. The Hong Kong Legislative Council, including CEO Carrie Lam of the Hong Kong government, is also under the control of the Chinese Communist Party via the Ministry of State Security. The Hong Kong Democratic Party was founded by Martin Lee. He says that the Chinese Communist Party is adhering to the agreement made in 1984 with London, namely, the Sino-Joint British Declaration and the Basic Law. But this claim is untenable. Martin Lee is a famous barrister in Hong Kong. His career dates back to the 1960s when he defended the Hong Kong Federation of Trade Unions during the Hong Kong 1967 leftist riots. Martin Lee has ties to the Chinese Communist Party, perhaps owing to his father, a Kuomintang general who defected to Hong Kong after the Communists occupied the mainland in 1949. Martin Lee's father was also a friend of Chinese Communist Premier Zhou Enlai, who repeatedly tried to recruit him. During the 1990s, Martin Lee started a political party. He originally proposed to name it the Hong Kong Communist Party. In the 1990s, Martin Lee played an important role in admitting Communist China into the World Trade Organization, WTO. Martin Lee's letter to President Bill Clinton was used by the White House to justify American support for China's admission to the WTO, as reproduced below. The participation of China in the WTO would not only have economic and political benefits, but would serve to bolster those in China who understand that the country must embrace the rule of law, which of course is a key principle underlying active membership in global trade organizations. For those of us who have long pressed for vigorous adherence to the rule of law in China, it is encouraging that so many Chinese officials support the nation's entry into groups such as the WTO. Naturally, the communists in Beijing had no intention of playing by WTO rules. Their trade policy has been a Trojan horse, used to influence powerful politicians and business leaders. Through trade, the communists have gained access to Western technology. They routinely infringe copyrights and steal patents. The cause of democracy has not been helped by China's admission to the WTO. Rather, the free world has been robbed and subverted. In this case, Martin Lee played a leading role. Today, Martin Lee has ties with American Democrats like Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco. Also high on the list of suspected Beijing agents is Jimmy Lai, a well-known entrepreneur in Hong Kong. Lai's bold anti-communist stance is inconsistent with his support for the Hong Kong Democratic Party. It is impossible he does not understand the true nature of the city's Democrats. Jimmy Lai is, of course, connected with Martin Lee and is a leading fundraiser for the Democrats. He owns some of Hong Kong's leading tabloid publications, featuring scandalous dirt and celebrity gossip. He has publicly rebuked Communist Party officials and is regularly denounced as an American running dog by the communists. Oshua Wong is a well-known activist in the Hong Kong independence movement. He is the general secretary of a pro-democracy party called Demosisto. Joshua Wong has been long suspected of having ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This became more than obvious in October when his party was caught using GoFundMe to raise money for the Catalonia independence movement. Although Beijing pretends to support a united Spanish state, Marxist-Leninist organizations associated with the Chinese Communist Party are solidly behind Catalan independence, as shown in the following article in the Workers' World. Joshua Wong's support for the Catalonia independence movement has led overseas and Hong Kong Chinese to question Wong's loyalties. Just as Beijing dissembles regarding its agenda vis-a-vis Catalan independence from Spain, the agents of Beijing are free to pursue that agenda openly. Next, we have student union leader Joey Xu. Here is her interview with Tim Sebastian. Sebastian says Xu's solidarity with the violent demonstrators and her unwillingness to denounce them has a totalitarian ring. Xu smiles but says she cannot criticize other protesters. When asked whether the violence is causing irreparable harm to the rule of law in Hong Kong, Xu merely repeats slogans referring to the need for change. Joey Xu calls the Hong Kong protest a leaderless movement. This is seriously mistaken. As our analysis shows, the Ministry of State Security is in control of both sides in Hong Kong. The outcome is foreordained. Who gave Joey Xu her talking points? It is Beijing that ultimately benefits if the violence in Hong Kong spirals out of control. Obviously, the communists will be justified when they intervene and absorb Hong Kong into the communist system. Here we arrive at the central issue. The reason why the Hong Kong Democratic Party is disliked by overseas and Hong Kong Chinese. It has effectively eroded the joint British-Sino Declaration and the Basic Law. The idea of one country, two systems is not going to last until 2047. The likes of Martin Li and Jimmy Lai have been known to have ties to the Chinese Communist Party and have deceived their own support base. Their actions and statements appear reasonable, but on close examination their cause aligns with Beijing's objectives. The real endgame of the Hong Kong protests comes the moment the Hong Kong Freedom and Democracy Act becomes law in the United States. There is a visa waiver in that bill which would allow millions of Chinese to enter the United States as refugees. A doorway would be opened from the Communist Empire of China to the land of liberty, the United States of America. But who would the Chinese, from their side, send through that door? It is a passage through which an army might invade, from a country imbued with patriotic nationalism to a country in the process of outlawing nationalism. When the Hong Kong Freedom and Democracy Act, or whatever its final name, becomes law, the Chinese Communist Party will send agents under the guise of refugees into the U.S. Perhaps whole units of the People's Liberation Army will be dispatched to America's shores. This may, indeed, be the ultimate purpose of the violence in Hong Kong. Here is an explanation for sacrifices made by Beijing and for the deceptive pronouncements of Beijing's agents of influence who masquerade as friends of liberty.